A few moments ago in Psalm 82, Brian read for us a passage that talked about how the people of earth are showing injustice. And he reminded them very powerfully in the middle of that they need to remember the weak and to help those who are weak and those who are struggling. Sometimes when we think about the period of time when the Israelites were in the wilderness, in one sense, we might have kind of an idealized view of the things that was happening. What I mean by that is we read passages like Deuteronomy, the 8th chapter and verse 4, where Moses reminds the people before they enter the land of promise. He says, your clothing didn't wear out and your feet didn't swell for these 40 years. So sometimes we might get the feeling that the Israelites' trip through the wilderness was not too much of a struggle. I mean, no new clothes for 40 years. Your feet don't swell when you're hiking around all that time. We know they complained a lot. We know they grumbled and they rebelled. But passages like that remind us that God was taking care of them through those difficult times. He gave them water, bread. He gave them meat. He was leading them. The passage we're going to read today is going to remind us that it was a great struggle for them in a lot of ways. And part of the story that we're going to read focuses around the staff of God. So we need to remember a few things about the staff of God. It's one of the key things that we see Moses carrying with him throughout the journey is that staff. And it shows itself as a token of God's power in a variety of ways. When Moses used it, it was clear that God was working through Moses and demonstrating his power. So on Mount Horeb, when he first is in communication with God at the burning bush, and he takes that staff and he throws it down and it turns into a serpent. That was a message from Moses at that time, that God was with him and he was going to be able to talk to the Pharaoh. And then God told him in the Exodus, the 4th chapter, verse 17, take this staff with you because it's with which you will do the signs. All the powers of God that he was going to do were going to come through and Moses using this staff. So unsurprisingly, as we see him in Egypt, that's what happens. He turns his staff into a serpent. Of course, the magicians try to imitate that and do, in fact, turn their staffs into serpents. But Moses' staff eats the other serpents. It's with the staff that he strikes the Nile and it turns into blood. He extends the staff over the land and they get the frogs. He extends it toward the sky and there's the thunder and the hail and the fire that come down. And the locusts also are connected with that. And I think for most of us, most prominently, is when the Red Sea is divided. It's Moses holding out that staff divides the Red Sea. And in fact, in the passage that we last studied when we were in Exodus, is when Moses struck the rock and the water came out after they had complained that there was no water. So the staff of God is used to say that this is something that's being accomplished by the power of God. And we're going to see that, I think, very clearly today. By using the staff, Moses is showing that it's really not about him. He's submitting to the power of God. And that's key lesson for all of us. In our text, Exodus, the 17th chapter and verse 8, we read, it says, then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. We're not told much more about this from this passage. It just says the Amalekites, they attacked the people of Israel. It's in Deuteronomy 25 that we get some insight into the kind of attack of the Amalekites. Deuteronomy 25, verses 17 through 19. Again, this is Moses. He's going to be recounting the things that happened on that day. Deuteronomy 25:17 through 19. Moses tells the people, "Remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you came out of Egypt, how he attacked you on the way when you were faint and weary, and cut off your tail, those who were lagging behind you, and he did not fear God. Therefore, when Jehovah your God has given you rest from all the enemies around you, in the land of Jehovah your God has given you for an inheritance to a possession, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven, you shall not forget." So that passage tells us that when the Amalekites attacked Israel, they did it by attacking the people at the end of the line. The people who were weak and who were weary, who were tired from the journey, those are the ones that they attacked. So Moses tells Joshua on the next day, "Choose men, we're going to go out and fight." This is back in our text in Exodus. And he says, "You choose men to go fight. I'm going to stand on the top of the hill with God's staff in my hand." So they get all of that ready. Joshua gets the men chosen, Moses and Aaron, and a guy named Hur that we don't read about much other places, all went up to the top of the hill. And as long as Moses held up the staff in his hands, Israel was winning. But if he lowered his hands, the Amalekites prevailed. And that's always struck me as odd when I was a kid. Why would that be what determined the battle? And the answer is, I didn't understand how important the staff of God was in this story. And just to give you a little insight, I had to fake this picture. Whoever drew this picture didn't have the staff of God in his hands. I had to put it in there. But it's key to the story, isn't it? If it's up, we're winning. If it's down, we're losing. And not surprisingly, Moses' hands grew weary. You try holding your hands up for a very long period of time. You're not going to make it past 5 or 10 minutes, much less if you have a staff in your hand. So they set it up so he had a stone to sit on. They sat him on a stone, and Aaron and Hur stood on each side, and they held up his hands, and it was steady that way. I don't doubt that it still hurt. His arms had to be tired from that. But because of this, Joshua and his army overwhelmed the people of Amalekite, put them to death with the sword. Then God tells them in verse 14, if you'll join me there again, it says, "Then Jehovah said to Moses, write this as a memorial in a book and recite it in the ears of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called the name of it, Jehovah is my banner, saying, a hand upon the throne of Jehovah. Jehovah will have war with Amalek from generation to generation." So we have this altar that he names, Jehovah is my banner. It's key to remember. It's an altar that is given this name because it's a remembrance of the sacrifice that was made. For most of us, when we think of a banner, we think of something, especially in these terms, of a military banner. Each regiment, each battalion has banners, and it's really impressive when you see them, their banners and what they signify. And the men who are part of those battalions are so proud of what that banner represents, about who's been in that battalion and who they are. It has so much meaning. The banner is a rallying point for the army. This is a place where we all gather together, and this is where we go to war. It gave everyone a single focus of where they needed to be in that battle. And in this case, what is the banner? It's really not a thing, it's Jehovah, isn't it? And an understanding that he is the power by which we have victory. Our victory comes only through the power of God. That's the most important thing about this lesson that we can think of and consider. Our victory comes only through the power of God. In the Proverbs, Solomon wrote, the horses were made ready for the battle, but the victory belongs to Jehovah. Of course, we've turned that into through the psalm. The battle belongs to the Lord, right, in our psalm books. But I like how the original, text means victory. It's not just battle, because even in the battle that we see in this text, what's happening? Sometimes winning, sometimes losing. As long as God is in the lead, what do we have? We have victory. Great victory for us. The people of Israel, as they're going through that wilderness, had often grumbled and complained about the difficulties. They didn't like the Egyptian army at their back when they were at the Red Sea. And twice there was no water, and they complained about the food. They even asked the question, according to one of the Psalms, can God provide for us a table in the wilderness? And he showed them that abundantly he could provide a table from the wilderness. But since leaving Egypt, this is the very first military engagement that they have to be involved in. And it's a sneak attack. It's a sneak attack on the weak people. We're told it's because the Amalekites didn't fear God. But just for a moment, I want us to remember these people who were lagging at the back of that line of millions of people wandering through the wilderness. They're described as faint and weak and lagging. That journey through the wilderness was hard on those people. Even with God providing water and food and all those kind of things, the clothes didn't wear out, all the things, it was hard on some of those people. They were weary and tired. We need to remember that even among God's people, there's those of us who are weary and tired and lagging. There are times when it's so hard to just keep on going through this life. That some of our brothers and sisters they're lagging behind, and instead of kind of shaking our heads at them, which sometimes we do, don't we? We're at the front and we're always trying to go on and on and on, and those who are in the back are like, come on, hurry up, catch up. But they're hurting. They're weary, they're tired. We need to remember that there are brothers and sisters among us who are weak. And those are the ones that get attacked. And when they attack the weak, they're attacking all of us. But the weak are going to be the ones that feel that. If we're not ready to help them, then we're not really doing what God would have us to do. We're not being a family. We're not being the people that God would want us to be. In Ephesians, the 6th chapter, the passage that we're all familiar with, and you probably knew I was going to. Ephesians, the 6th chapter, verse 10, you remember what God told us through the Apostle Paul. He says, finally be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. This is the banner. This is the staff of God, right? Be strong in him. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For the Amalekites, in this case, the schemes of the devil were to attack the weak, the ones that were in the back. We have to be strong in the Lord. When we say Jehovah is our banner, what are we saying? The staff of God represents the power of God. We lift up the standard of God. When we lift up God, the battle's going to go well. But if we let it slip, the battle's going to go poorly. Jehovah must be our rallying point in all of our battles. We rally around him. We rally around those who are weak, to fight for them and to protect them against the schemes of the devil, those who would turn and attack us. And that means we have to put all of our hope in God. Don't we see that clearly in this passage, that we can't depend upon our own strength? And that it's not just about me, that I have to consider and remember those who are weak and lagging and hurting, that I'm not alone, that I can't just stand up on my own. Even Moses needed help. Joshua was told, gather the army. Moses needed help holding up the staff. We need to put on the whole armor of God so that we can get through this. If there's one chink in that armor, that's a weakness, right? One chink, who's going to find that? Satan's going to find it. If there's weakness among us, we need to help those who are struggling, or Satan's going to get us. And of course, Paul at the end of that passage in Ephesians 6 tells us to do what? To pray. And pray and pray. We must be praying. And when we look at how things are going for this congregation or for individuals among us, what happens when the battle's going the wrong way? We know the victory belongs to the Lord, but what happens when the battle is, the enemy's too strong for us? It tells me or reminds me that I'm not rallying around God, right? So lift up the Lord in your heart again. I know you're tired and you're weary, but lift up God in your heart again. Rally around Him. You remember we studied not too long ago about David when he was living in Ziklag and he had gone to be among the Philistines, and he came back and they had taken away all the wives and the children, and they were decimated, and his own people, David's own people, were out to get him. And the very first thing it says that David did is he strengthened himself in the Lord. That needs to be the very first thing we need to rally around. Jehovah is my banner. I'm going to strengthen myself in the Lord. We don't have the staff of God, do we? But can we still rally around Him? He needs to be our banner. Strengthen yourself in the Lord. It means going back to some of the basics. Praying, meditate, meeting with saints, finding strength and comfort with each other. Because He's the one that provides the victory. So this passage reminds me that sometimes we're going to be attacked by those who are wicked. We're warned in Ephesians 6 that we refer to about the schemes of the devil, that we don't war against flesh and blood, but against the spiritual darkness, against the forces of evil. Peter reminds us in 1 Peter 5 verse 8 that Satan's like a roaring lion. And what does he do? Seeking someone to devour. Who is he seeking to devour? Where is he going to look? At all of us, the answer is, right? But especially those who are weak. Especially those who are easy to pick up. Those who are lagging behind us. Those who are struggling in the faith. The wicked attack the weak. Whether it's Satan or other people, the world, they're going to attack it. The lion seeks the easy target to bring down, not the strongest. And too often, we dismiss those who are weak among us. We shake our heads at them, and there's disappointment in our eyes, and we fail in any significant way to treat them like we should. That's why I had us read Psalm 82. Psalm 82 verses 3 and 4. Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the ungodly. If you know of a brother or sister who is struggling with their faith or struggling with life has become difficult. When we look around, we know there are many people who aren't here. Whether it's because they're still afraid or whatever is happening in their lives, we know that there are among us those who are weak. And just because people are here doesn't mean they're strong either. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hands of the ungodly. Instead of dismissing them and shaking our heads at them, we need to be on the front lines fighting for them. I love this attitude as portrayed by Paul in 2 Corinthians. You remember in 1 Corinthians, they had to deal with a man who was sinning in a very vile manner. It was a sexual sin with his stepmother, we think, and the Apostle Paul has to tell them to take drastic measures, to withdraw themselves from him so that he'll do what's right. But then in 2 Corinthians, the 2nd chapter, he gives them this reminder. Now, if anyone has caused pain, he has caused it not to me, but in some measure, not to put it too severely, to all of you. For such a one, and I think this is referring to the message in 1 Corinthians 5. For such a one, this punishment by the majority is enough. So you should rather turn to forgive and comfort him, or he may be overwhelmed by excessive sorrow. So I beg you, reaffirm your love for him. When there are those among us who are weak and suffering, Paul reminds us that the way that we treat those who are lagging and faint can either comfort and help them or push them further away. And that's why he says, I beg of you, reaffirm your love. We need to reaffirm our love for each other, especially when we're being attacked. And when aren't we being attacked? We need to reaffirm that love for one another. Paul says, that's why I wrote this letter to you, so that you would forgive that one. And then he says at the very end, in verse 11, so that we would not be outwitted by Satan, for we are not ignorant of his designs. If we don't help those who are weak, we're helping Satan. If we push them further away instead of draw them to us in love, we're letting Satan win. And that's a scary thought. Look with me in 1 Thessalonians, the 5th chapter, verse 14. Paul gives this admonition to the brethren in Thessalonica. 1 Thessalonians 5, and then verse 14. And we urge you, brothers, admonish the idle, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with them all. Here we have people who are mentioned as idle, faint-hearted, and weak. Are there any among us who are idle? Are there any among us who are faint-hearted or weak? Of course there are. Don't dismiss them. Look at what it says to do. If someone's idle, you admonish them. And that's not just pointing the finger at it and saying, I know you're not doing anything, get busy, right? That's not admonishment. We need to help them to get moving again. Maybe there's reasons why they're idle that we don't know anything about. Don't assume. Go help them. Encourage the faint-hearted. Often we do that by helping lift the burdens that they are bearing. Help those who are weak. And what is the very last thing that he says to us in those verses? Be patient with them all. How are we treating the weak among us? Are we helping, or are we pushing them away? What are we choosing to do? We need to resist the devil. That's what Peter says in 1 Peter 5, verse 8. It's not just the devil is seeking those whom he may devour, but what does he tell us to do in verse 9? Resist him, firm in your faith. Resist the devil and don't give in to that. The second thing I learned from this story is that we're all going to need to fight. It's really kind of one of the interesting things to me about this story is what didn't happen. Because the weak and the faint are attacked. And this time, the people of Israel, there's no complaining or murmuring or grumbling. Why? Why aren't they complaining, saying, oh, you let the Amalekites... I don't know why it didn't happen. They'd struggled with everything else. They blamed God and Moses for everything else. Had they finally learned to trust in Jehovah? The story continues, and we'll find out whether that's true or not, but the answer is no. So that's interesting. At this time, when a new crisis hits, we see them all get together to fight. And maybe that's just they recognized there was a common enemy. Moses' plan was incredibly simple, wasn't it? I need some of you men to go fight. I'm going to need some men to go before God and seek God's help, to exalt God. That's it. We should not think that even in a case like this, that we can always just sit back and wait for God to give us victory. Sometimes we've got to go out and fight. The Israelites had seen God's power for them at the Red Sea, so they know God can. God could have delivered them this time just like he had at the Red Sea, just wiped out the Amalekites. But that was the exception, not the rule. They were going to have to get ready to fight and be ready to fight as they went into the land. In this case, and in most cases, it's necessary for us to fight to save God's people. The weak, the strong, all of us, we need to join together in that. We all have these roles in the battle. They're not all the same roles. We have to be ready to fight. Our battles are spiritual, aren't they? We need to be very clear who we're fighting. For the Amalekites, it says they did not fear God. You recall that? Is that true about the battles that we fight? We're fighting against those who do not fear God, so they feel they can take advantage of us. The battles of the kingdom of God, the battle is for souls, for those who are lost, for those who are struggling, for those who are weak. So we need to be all of us ready to fight. But not just that, we need to be ready to rally around Jehovah, our banner, don't we? We need to seek God's help. So rally around the banner of Christ. And that's why I love the way that this ends with all the Aaron and Hur holding up the arms of Moses. You know, if the Amalekites had been paying attention to that, they might have seen what was happening about that staff and the things that were going on. But there might have been a lot of people among the Israelites questioning, what is Moses? What is Aaron and Hur? Why are they up on that hill? It doesn't really matter. They're just up there. Why aren't they down here fighting with us? Were they fighting? They kept God's standard lifted up so the people could fight. There's different ways for us to fight these spiritual battles. Some right on the front lines, but some of us need to be in the back, holding up the staff of God. We all need to fight. Here's another thing, though, that fits with that. Let other people know when you're weak and you're tired and you're fainting. How can we defend you? How can we help you if we don't know? The armies needed God and his staff to win. Moses needed his arms to be held up. Even leaders grow tired. They need positive, uplifting support. We all fight, and we need to all fight for each other. In the end, God told Moses to write down a commemoration of what happened on this day and to recite it to Joshua. Amalek's going to be blotted out. The war from this generation is forever. This is a great battle, worthy of being remembered. Not for just what happened. I mean, that's what we tell our kids, right? That story. But also for this clear indication, Jehovah is going to defeat Amalek, and it's always going to be by the power of God. And he reminds them that they have to do that. So you need to remember this. And so the altar is built, a place of worship and sacrifice. And the name of that altar, Jehovah is our banner. Our greatest battle is with sin, with death, with fear, with guilt, the things that we face in this life. And in Jesus, we have victory over those, don't we? 1 Corinthians 15 reminds us of that beautifully. The sting of death is sin. The power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Rally around that banner that we have that great thing. And each week we come together to remember this great victory, don't we, when we commune together. When we remember the Lord's death, that's our memory. One of the things I love about that communion dinner is that in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 17, what does he tell us about it? Because there's one bread, we who are many are one body, for we all partake of one bread. We must see in partaking of the communion not only our victory, because Jesus grants us that victory, but the unity that it brings us together. One bread, we're one body, and we need to fight for each other. Jehovah is my banner. And when we're attacked, we're all attacked. Let's make that determination. We're going to fight Satan. We're going to help those who are weak and those who are fainting and those who are idle. And we're going to rally around the standard of Jehovah. And together, we're going to be his people. If there's anyone here this morning who, because you believe that Jesus is the Son of God and you want to become his child through belief in baptism, please come forward as we stand and sing.